Kia ora, everyone, and welcome. My name is Bridget, and today we're going to be looking at the latest trends in the New Zealand graduate recruitment market. I'm joined by my colleague, Grant, and thanks for joining. It's great to have you all online, and we're really excited to have you here. As I said, there's quite a lot that we need to cover off. We jump right in first. Right. As a little bit of an agenda, we are going to be taking a look at the search and application trends, which regions are the most popular, opportunity and salary trends. As possible, implemented full disclosure of salaries a while back. So we're going to be looking at what impact that has had. And then we'll dive into some of the data in terms of what jobs are more popular and look at the trends around what grads are getting paid. And then I'll be handing you over to Grant, who will walk you through some completion and commencement data. And then we'll get on to some of what we think you could be doing to help your visibility and a little bit of a Q&A at the end. Please feel free as we're running through everything just to add any questions that you may have into the Q&A. And as I said, we'll try and cover those off at the end. As a little bit of an intro for those of you who don't know, Possible. Our mission at Possible is to give every single student globally the best possible start to their career. And we do this through our online jobs boards, NZ Possible, New Zealand. You may also have noticed that we recently changed our Grad Australia to AU Possible. And we are busy consolidating to run all of our platforms named. So New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, India, and 4 other countries. We also partner with associations and tertiary education departments and run their jobs as well. And that helps them assist their student members to find employment opportunities. Like I said, my name is Bridget, and I'm a graduate recruitment consultant here at Possible. And I work with clients across both New Zealand and Australia. And I'm joined by my colleague Grant, who many of you on this call will already know. Grant's been around for a while. And I'll hand the mic over to you, Grant, so you can say hi and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Bridget, and good morning. I think it's good afternoon now in New Zealand. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who aren't familiar with who I am, my name's Grant. I'm head of employer partnerships here at Possible. So I work with a number of, quite a few familiar faces, or names at least, online in the Zoom participants panel there. So lovely to see you online today. So I'll work with employers across Australia and New Zealand, and look after a lovely team of consultants, including Bridget, looking after our Australia and New Zealand employer partners. But short and sweet, I'll hand the mic back to you, Bridget, because I think you're going to take us through the search and application trends.
100%. Thanks, Grant. So let's jump into it and see what interesting, insightful data we can share with you today in what has been another interesting year in the grad recruitment space. So if you have a look at the overall application numbers year on year, you'll see in 2022, just on over 26,000, and in 2023, 31,000. So the good news is that we've seen a 17% increase in the amount of applications on our New Zealand platform, which is fantastic news for everyone. Last year was a really tough year with application numbers being down across the board. So it's really encouraging to see that those numbers are picking up again. So what is causing this trend? So if you have a look at this graph here, there are more students that are looking for jobs. So just to clarify, this graph does not represent the amount of student users, but rather the amount of searches on the jobs board. So every student is searching for more jobs, looking to see what opportunities are out there, going into more pages and using the platform to its full capability with using the filters and generally using the jobs board more than ever before, resulting in a huge increase in job searches. Now, interesting to see that the increased activity started in the main peak recruitment period around about that March time. consistent since then, an 80% increase on this period last year. And although our users have also increased year on year, it's just key to point out that this engagement that you are seeing on the platform is the interaction. So there's lots of good things that are happening in terms of those students using the jobs board. What I also noticed, as if you want to look at the applications by industry sector, but this increase is not the same across every sector. So not every sector has had the same impact of increased application numbers. So if you have a look at this, you will see that engineering consulting is up, technology is up, but accounting and advisory has seen a huge drop, as has banking and financial services. So with accounting, seen the biggest decline, but again, interesting enough, law, government, engineering consulting, all up with increases. And biggest increase we've seen is tech, which is up 4% on last year. That is applications by industry sector. So now let's look at the degree trends. What are students doing? So whether they are engineering students or IT students, how are they doing their searches? Overall, the number of students looking for IT jobs has gone up 6%. So if you look in 2020, it was sitting on 14%, up to 2022 was 14%, up to 2023 is 20%. And so that's a 6% increase year on year. Whereas business, 45% down to 35%, that is a 10% decrease year on year. So where are the business students applying? If you have a look at this graph, you will see that in 2022, we had if you had 100 business students, in 2022, 37% of those 100 business students would go on to apply for a role in accounting and advisory, where in 2023, only 25% have gone on to apply for a role in accounting and advisory. Versus technology, you've seen an increase from 13% to 15%. Quite a diverse preference in terms of where these students are applying. And although accounting and advisory definitely takes the lead, what the graph does tell us is that it's down on previous years. And also interesting to see that consumer goods and retail is up 8% on last year, quite keen favourite. So a lot of those business students looking to apply for positions in retail and consumer goods. Moving on to engineering. And here we have a very clear picture. Engineering consulting is where this cohort is wanting to work. Technology is also a favourite from last year. So what this is, maybe these students are a little bit more engaged and going on to research these opportunities. And yes, definitely you can see that this cohort of engineering students are looking for opportunities in the engineering consulting firms. Moving on to the next slide, please, Grant. Moving on to IT. The majority of your applications, pretty consistent with last year, are within tech firms. Also interesting to note that applications from IT students are across every sector except for accounting and advisory and banking, where we've actually seen a sizable decrease year on year. Your law firms are a far more popular choice for your law students, with fewer students applying an accounting and an advisory firm. So last year we saw 28% of those applications going to the law firms. This year up to 58, almost 60% of your law students applying for those positions. Right, so that's where the students are applying. Have a look at the geographic data in terms of,
Sorry, there's one more.
Sorry. In terms of your science students, But the majority of your science students, 29% from just on 7.69% last year, looking to work in government and public services, which is a huge increase that we've seen. And then followed closely by technology and then accounting and advisory. Moving on to location search trends, let's look at the geographical data in terms of students in New Zealand. So where are students searching from? So this is where the students are based when they are searching for the position. So the majority of your students, 60%, are in Auckland, looking for positions. And what you can see that we've had a 12% increase from last year. So 48% last year up to 60% this year in Auckland, with all the other regions actually seen a slight decrease, bar Tauranga, where we've seen a little bit of an increase. So that's where those students are located when they're actually looking for their positions. Over to the next slide. This is where the students are wanting to work. So in 2022, 38% of students were wanting to work in Auckland, versus this year is up to 40% wanting to work in Auckland. Interestingly enough, if you recall on the previous slide, the majority of those students searching from Auckland, it also tells us that a lot of these students that are in Auckland searching for jobs don't necessarily want to work in Auckland. They actually want to get out and work in the other regions. And yeah, next to Auckland, we have Wellington and then Christchurch. Also interesting to note that Christchurch had the second highest amount of students on the previous slide looking for opportunities. However, Auckland and Wellington ranked the highest in terms of popularity. And that could be due to a number of factors. It could be limited opportunities in those regions, more students wanting to work in Auckland, more students wanting to work out of the Christchurch region. Also, very interesting to note is that those students that were in Auckland that are looking to apply for other areas, it could also be because they've gone on to study at the University of Auckland or AUT there, and now they maybe want to go back to the region where they grew up and start their careers there. We do also see a lower percentage of students looking for remote working opportunities. Last year we had 8.83% looking for those opportunities. This year it's down to 4.69%. Looks like the students would prefer more in person than they did in previous years. So the good news is that Kiwis are less interested in spreading their wings this year. So last year, 85% applying for positions in New Zealand to 94% this year. And in previous years, they were looking at opportunities in Australia and other countries overseas, where that has just decreased substantially. This slide tells us that they no longer want to leave, and they're very happy to stay in the land of the long white cloud, which is great news for all of our recruiters out there. So now let's look at the opportunity and salary trends. First of all, what we're going to have a look at here is the job opportunities by year. So 2022 versus 2023. Interesting to see that we've had a huge increase in popularity in 2023 on internships, up 11% on last year. Now, this could be because things are opening up back to normal again, and the students could actually apply for internships with the confidence knowing that they will go ahead. And perhaps realizing that this is a great way for them to bulk their CVs and to get that practical on-the-job experience that's going to support them when they start to apply for their graduate jobs. So that was the amount of students apply for internships and graduate jobs. Also interesting to see that it's not only the popularity, but also in terms of, that was the searches. This is the actual students going on to actually apply for those positions. It's the same sort of split in terms of internships are 34% and grad positions on 66%. So now let's have a look at the graduate jobs and internship vacancies by month. So this slide speaks to how many vacancies and positions we had live. The key thing to note here is that this is the amount of vacancy numbers, so not individual job listings. So if a job had 20 vacancies or 5 vacancies, this is the number that we're looking at over here. So in this example here, you can see there's 3 to 10 vacancies. And so overall, you can see that the number of vacancies are up year on year. What is also key for me to point out is that if your applications opened up in March and closed in May, it would only be counted in the months of March on this graph. So March, April, and May, strangely enough, we typically have just seen that peak in the March period. It's been pretty consistent, April and May. And what that tells us is that there's been a little bit of a shift in when employers are going to market. And some of this data should also be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt, a pinch of salt, because this includes your expressions of interest and your ERIs, your pre-registers, which we can't actually split out from current open roles, just to bear that in mind when looking at this graph as well.
Yeah, and just if I can chime in there. So the pre-register, for those who aren't familiar with those, many of our employer partners will be familiar with this, where we encourage you to create a pre-register to start capturing student engagement and student interest before you actually open applications. So let's say, for example, if you're recruiting in July or August this year, we encourage all of our employer partners over the last 6 to 12 months to create pre-registers to build up that talent pool, so we can ping a note to the students saying, hey, applications have gone live in August. But like Bridget said, that counts this data, and therefore it is somewhat skewed. We'll be looking forward to next year once we've got more balanced data to provide you with really accurate insights there. But just food for thought.
Thanks, Grant.
No worries.
Okay, role versus generalist programs. What we saw in the past year that's a little bit different is that more and more of our employers are actually starting to split out their jobs so that it does not just advertise generalist roles, but more role-specific positions as well. And although some have been doing that in the past, what we've seen from a student point of view is that this engagement has worked extremely well, because they can actually go onto the jobs board and get a lot more insight into what the program looks like. So instead of just saying general graduate program, displaying a multitude of roles under one program, the student can say, wow, it's not just a grad program. They are specifically looking for a transport graduate civil engineer. And we are encouraging all of you to split out your roles. It's so easy. You have unlimited job slots, and we can see how well this works for the students in terms of them being able to go on there, engage, with a clear understanding in terms of what the position is, as opposed to just a general grad program. That's why we'd ask you to do that. And why we are encouraging you to do that is if you look at this data over here in terms of the proportion of applications received across our jobs, general job roles versus role-specific positions, you can see that role-specific received just 67% of applications, where your generalist positions only 32% of applications. So 36% more applications on increase on generalist roles to role-based positions. So in terms of looking at what that means across the different degrees, as you can see, your business students, 57% preferred a role-based position, which is less than the average across all other degrees. However, in your engineering and mathematics, 66% were more interested in a role-based position than a generalist position. For your humanities students, are far more inclined to apply for role-based positions, as with your IT and computer students, with 65% preferring your role-based positions. For your law students, you can see that role-based positions far outperform the rest. So what we're saying here is, with a small, simple change, just as splitting out your roles and being more specific, you can bring about great outcomes. The science students as well, 61% preferring those role-based job titles. Right, onto remuneration. So let's have a look at the salary trends. As you would know, SPIL has, since the beginning of this year, been enforcing the disclosure of salaries and making it mandatory for all employers to publish their salaries on our jobs board. And we did this because the students were becoming frustrated. They gave us feedback and they said they want to know what is in it for them. And we can see how well this has worked, and the students are absolutely loving it. On to the next slide, please, Grant. So if you have a look here at the salary ranges and what that looks like, 51% of your job opportunities in that 60 to 70 range, with 23% in that 70 to 80 range. There are a few outliers, as you can see, a couple of those 90 plus, and those are your companies that are your large trading firms in Australia that are looking for those top students, and they're actually advertising their roles here in New Zealand, looking for Kiwi students to go on and apply. On to some data on salary by sector. Interesting to see that the average salary by industry sector has seen an increase across the board, except for transport, where we've seen a decrease. And if you have already seen it, we do actually publish an annual salary guide here at Prospil, which breaks it down by country, by sector, by region, giving you insights into what employers are paying. And this data is taken from our platforms. If you haven't seen it, or if you'd like to get a copy, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Grant or your account manager post the session, and they can share that data with you. Good. Now I'm going to hand over to Grant, who is going to walk you through our student population commencement data and see what that looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Bridget. And some really good questions in the chat. I'm trying to get to a few of them, but it's quite hard to multitask between clicking through slides and answering questions. Bridget, if you want to have a crack at answering a few of those in there. If not, keep on popping those questions in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. We've definitely carved out some time to address those questions. But yeah, moving along to the commencement data. So just to provide a snapshot, so this is the amount of students enrolling and starting their studies in New Zealand. So we're going to be looking at that data first, and then we're going to be moving on to the graduating population. So the students who are receiving their certificates and degrees. And so we'll go through that in a little bit. But first, for commencement data, overall, we've seen a steady decline in students commencing their studies in New Zealand since 2010. So you can see on the graph, I'll use my mouse here. You can see in the graph here that there was a peak in sort of 2005, plateaued a little bit to 2010, and it's dropped off steadily since then. And that's across both the total number of students commencing their studies. Domestic students has dropped off more dramatically, and there's actually been an increase in international students over the past, particularly over the past 10 to 12 years, since 2010 and 2012. You can see that there's been a little bit of a decline over the last couple of years of international students coming to New Zealand, and that's natural because of what happened with COVID and borders closing. Naturally, they weren't able to commence their studies because they weren't allowed in the country for a couple of years. So hopefully that picks up a little bit over the next few years, but it's a bit of a wait and see. So let's take a look at what degrees are becoming more popular. And personally, I found this really interesting to dive into. So we've seen a decrease in IT and business students, which it's commencing their studies. So we're going to look at a little bit, as I said in a moment, in terms of students that are graduating from university, but we're seeing fewer business and IT students begin their studies at university. which is a little bit of a concern because we know that they're two of the most employable degrees. I know with all my employer partners, they're clamoring over the top business and IT students. Now let's take a look at if we break it down by specific study field. And we can see that, again, with management and commerce, so your business, marketing, finance, economics grads, or students rather, again, there's been a bit of a decline since 2013. So in 2013, on the left-hand side, you can see that we topped out in New Zealand around 16,000 business, management and commerce students beginning their studies. And then that's, as I said, declined quite drastically over the last 10 or 12 years. As I said, it's less drastic with IT. Again, a bit of a decline in the number of domestic students. So you can see on the right-hand side under IT that in 2013, there was 17,000 domestic IT students that were beginning their studies and 3.7 thousand international students. So international students has become more popular for students to come to New Zealand and commence their IT studies, whereas there has been a bit of a decline in the total number of domestic students. So it's about a drop off of about 3,500 or 3.3 thousand in the last 10 years. Now let's take a look at engineering, and this is a little bit more of a roller coaster one. It was big increases from 2013 up until 2019, where it topped out around 7.7 thousand, so 7,700 engineering students in total, of which, so you can see in 2019 here, so I use my mouse again, where there was 5.7 thousand domestic engineering students commencing their studies, and about 2,000 international students. But that's declined, as I said, dramatically over the last couple of years as well, which is, again, a little bit concerning. Perhaps it's due to COVID. As you can see, there's been a big drop off of engineering students, international students commencing their engineering studies in New Zealand over the last couple of years. So again, hopefully that picks up now that borders are back open. We're getting to back to some sort of normalcy in New Zealand. If we take a look at the Māori and Pacifica cohorts, we can see that overall, so there's been fewer Māori students commencing their studies at university over the last 10 or so years. Pacifica, there's been a little bit of a drop-off, but not as much. So it's 35,000 in 2013 to 34,000 in 2022. And we've got some gender breakdowns there as well. And there was a question in the chat earlier that I touched on. Yes, we will be sharing these slides with you afterwards, so don't feel like you need to frantically scribble down notes. Why not? We'll share that probably next week when we create a blog. Link a recording to that as well. So let's take a look at the total number of students completing their degrees amongst university students. So we can see that there's been more international students completing their degrees over the last 10 or so years since 2012. So that's the red line. That's been a steady increase. In terms of the total number of students completing their studies, that's remained flatlined, and there's been a little bit of a decrease in domestic students. So I think that's an interesting story to tell, because whilst there's fewer students starting university and commencing their studies at university in New Zealand, the conversion rate to get a degree is actually higher than that it has been in previous years. So as I said, by that steady state that we can see in this graph here. If we take a look at the completion data by specific study fields, and it's a little bit choppy here, we can see that there's actually more IT students who are completing their studies. So I mentioned in an earlier slide that there was IT students and business students in particular had really dropped off. IT students, they're actually completing their studies more often now, whereas management and commerce, there has been a bit of a decline, especially since 2019. You can see that line here. It's dropped off a little bit the last few years. If we take a look at the total number of students completing their studies within each degree now and how that's changed year on year. And I've also broken this data down by both international students and domestic students. So you can see here in 2021, we had about 1,040 engineering students in total. comprising of both domestic and international students. So that's been on the rise of those graduations over the last 10 or so years. And a really big boom, as I touched on just previously with information technology. Far more students, especially the international students, are completing their studies with an IT degree now than there ever has been in New Zealand, which is great, as I said, in terms of just employers who are hiring IT grads. There's more of them. However, like I sort of touched on previously, it looks like there's fewer of them in the pipeline in terms of the total number of students commencing their degree. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there in the data, which is interesting. And I've got some theories on that, which I'll chat about in a second. If we take a look at I've also included some natural and physical sciences in here, as well as architecture. For natural and physical sciences, it's been pretty similar over the last 10 or so years. There's been an increase in architecture grads. I know a number of my employers are looking for architecture grads, so I included that in there, as well as management and commerce. So whilst there's been, as I touched on earlier, whilst there's been more management and commerce grads completing their studies compared to 10 years ago, you can see that there's been a little bit of a peak in 2018 where there was 7,035 business management graduates, and that's dropped off a little bit over the last few years. And that's probably an indication of why, Bridget, you discussed this earlier when we saw that there was fewer business students searching positions this year. It's probably a reason of this data here is that there's just fewer of them. And I know a number of my accounting clients have indicated that this year where applications it's just becoming more competitive for that top talent. So whilst there's fewer Māori and Pacifica students commencing their studies, if we take a look at the completion data, there's actually more Māori and Pacifica students completing their degree now than there ever has been. A little bit of a drop off from 2020 to 2021, but overall it's been a steady increase over the last 10 or so years, which is a great sign. And it shows that not only are they commencing their studies, but they're going on to complete their qualification and go into the big wide world and search for employment. So it's great for employers who have got focused on attracting more applications and hiring more Māori and Pacifica grads. That's a good sign that there is more in the pipeline. And whilst it still remains quite competitive for that talent, we're starting to see a bit of a pickup in terms of overall conversion from them starting their university to actually completing it and getting the qualification. So whilst Māori and Pacifica people are gaining more qualifications, the education gap still remains, unfortunately. So if we take a look at the total number of all New Zealanders, which is that yellow line up top there, you can see the percentage of all Kiwis that have gained a qualification, and then in comparison to Māori and Pacifica. So whilst that gap is close, there is still an education gap, and this is something that a lot of people are obviously aware of and across. So whilst the gap's closing, there is still that gap there, and I know that the New Zealand government and universities and high schools are doing a lot to try and close that gap. So it is working, but it's still a work in progress, unfortunately. So a couple of theories per se in terms of what's causing the drop-off in enrollments and completions. And back to, if we switch back to previous generations, universities, in terms of point number one here, so the access to education has increased. So degrees, they just simply aren't as popular as they have been previously. So like I said, if we look back at previous generations, universities had all the knowledge locked up in libraries where, to go and to learn coding, for example, you need to go to university and take an IT course in order to gain that knowledge. Now, anyone can learn anything, anywhere, at any time. All they really need is a computer and an internet connection. So I think that's where we'll see, I think a steady decline in overall participation at university in the next 5 or 10 years, because of things like people coin it as like YouTube Uni. You can jump on YouTube and learn a whole bunch of different stuff, or you could go on Coursera and learn how to code and whatnot. So it's something that we're very conscious of at Prosper, and hence why we want to partner with not just universities and polytechs, but also other smaller organizations like Tutorium, for example, and provide access to opportunity for students who are going to try and learn in a whole variety of ways. And I think that'll be a trend next decade or so. It's also becoming, in terms of point number 2 here, Gen Zers are also becoming more entrepreneurial. They've got more of an entrepreneurial spirit than they did in previous generations. It's never been easier to start an e-commerce business or be an influencer on Instagram or TikTok. And we can see that when we do user testing with students, is they've got an appetite to try their hand at a small business or at least a side hustle to begin things once they complete their university studies. And Bridget, you and I were talking about this on Thursday or Friday last week, that the birth rate has decreased significantly in New Zealand over the last, especially the last couple of decades, but especially since the 1960s. And whilst what that means is there's fewer young people being able to attend university to actually get that degree in the first place. And that's what we're seeing with that the commencement data, where there's just fewer students commencing their studies in New Zealand. And I think that some of that talks back to the birth rate in New Zealand being a steady decline over the last 50 or 60 years. So that's it from me on that front. Bridge, I think I'm handing the mic back to you to talk through some tips and what employers can do in this space to maximize what is somewhat of a shrinking cohort, but it still remains increasingly competitive. I know you touched on earlier that whilst there's, as I understood, set through, there's fewer students. Yes, they're applying for more roles. They're more engaged, at least on the Prosper End platform this year. But there's also a lot more employers hiring more grads. I might hand the mic to you to talk through what employers can do in this space.
Thanks, Grant. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of tips that we think could help you in driving those applications and what you can do to ensure that you stand out during those key recruitment times. I'm going to start with the obvious: improve your salary. And I know that you can't see your faces, but I'm sure that there's a whole lot of eyeball rolling going out there, and you're thinking to yourself, Bridget, that isn't that easy. We can't just do it, and it's not up for me to decide. And that's 100% understandable. But we know that this is a key deciding factor for students when they are looking for jobs. And we can help you in giving you that information in terms of what the salaries are in your sector, just making it easier for you to open those conversations internally to understand how your salaries compare. And what you should also be doing is highlighting added benefits over and above your salary. Make sure that you are letting the students know about all the added benefits, from leave days to gym memberships to corporate clothing allowances and other perks. Yeah, just to articulate this, just bear in mind they don't know what they don't know, and you need to give them all the tools so that they can make this decision and go on to try for your opportunities. Tell them what those benefits are, and don't just say added benefits. Bottomless barista coffees, subsidized lunches, and half-day Fridays could be exactly what these students are looking for. Also, in terms of helping your job stand out in a crowded market, is you have the ability to influence your visibility. When you're going out to market with your very attractive offers now, you need to make sure that when a student comes onto the jobs board and there's 159 jobs available to them, that you stand out. And you can do this by promoting your opportunities. So when a student is online looking for a job in that peak period and there's 159 jobs, you will be at the top of the jobs board. And there's absolutely no way that they can miss your post. Also, start looking at exciting ways in which to engage with this Gen Z. Where are they spending the bulk of their time, and what content works for you speaking to them? Social media is a great tool for branding. And the great thing about working with us and our social media team in terms of putting together this content for you is that we can target students based on gender, based on age, based on their interests and location. So in some of those hard to recruit regions where you're looking for students, we can help you with that on the social media front.
So just to dive in there, sorry, Bridge. So it's 159 jobs available on Prosper New Zealand right now. So this is mid-June, right? So think about that. If we switch back to the peak of March and April, there was more than 500 jobs available. So to, like what Bridget's saying, to ensure that your job stands out and that you're maximising your subscription with Prosper by promoting the job, that's a really good way of ensuring that the eyeballs are on your job rather than your competitors.
Yeah. And you could even consider keeping your applications open all year round. And are you looking outside of those domestic students? Why not look at opening applications to international students? Following on some of that data that Grant took you across earlier, if you are looking for IT students, which everyone is, if you were looking just in that domestic pool, look at the 2021 number, 1,325, and you want the top 10%, it's only 130 students. Why not open it up to those international students? Our friends at Talent Solutions recently ran a webinar on this, and actually it's much easier than when you think. There's been this great misconception around hiring international students, with many clients putting it in the too hard basket. But did you know that a level 7 or above student is eligible for a 3-year post-study work visa in New Zealand with open work rights, so not tied into one individual employer? And there's some great talents out there that you could be overlooking. Perhaps consider opening up your applications to international students as well. And in addition to that, again, was what Grant touched on, instead of just looking at those university students, everybody is looking to get more Maori and Pacific students. Consider opening up your applications to your Maori and Pacifica students through your Polytech graduates. There's 11,650 students out there that would be a great addition to your Maori and Pacifica cohorts joining your companies. Yeah. So good food for thoughts in terms of some of the things that you can be doing to increase that visibility in those recruitment periods in this extremely competitive market.
You're spot on, Bridget. And just doubling back to what you're saying around social media, in marketing, there's kind of two types of marketing. There's passive marketing and there's active marketing. And if we put our hats in, if we put ourselves in the student's perspective, when they're actively searching for jobs, they're going to be using job boards like Prosper NZ to be searching, finding, and applying for employment opportunities. Or if they go to a career fair or a networking event, that's when they're actively searching for jobs. If we switch that mindset to a passive market, i.e. the students just browsing through social media, you don't really go to Instagram or TikTok to search for jobs, right? But what we can do is we can actually target those students when they're just passively browsing through their social media feed. And we as in employers and Prosper can assist you with this, which is what Bridget was alluding to before, where we can actually target those students based on a whole bunch of information, like I said, Bridge, like age, demographic, interest. We can very quickly point out whether they're business students or IT students based on other interactions that they've had on platforms. We can do things like retargeting. So, for example, if a student's come across your brand on Prosper NZ, and then we know that they've then transitioned across to a platform like TikTok, we can actually target those students as well to encourage them to go and apply for your organization. There's a lot of flexibility that we can do that in that passive market to help drive more eyeballs and applications to your brand and opportunities. But there's a couple of questions in the chat, so let's dive in. How do you want to go through this, Bridget? I think there was one or two that you marked that you'd like to answer. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. So Wanda, hi Wanda, nice to see you. Be interesting to hear if businesses still considering international students in their programs given the new immigration changes and difficulties to keep them on after post-study visa. Understand it, and you can also reach out to Talent Solutions and they can share some more information on this, Wanda. But actually, the median wage for them to go on to get that post 3-year, so once they've qualified and they automatically get a 3-year post-study work visa, From there, they can actually go on to apply for a residency visa, and they've actually brought down the threshold substantially. It's now sitting at a medium wage of 62,000. And basically, any grad that has graduated and done a 3-year program should be sitting in that bracket. If not, you might be underpaying, but it is actually easy to get them to stay on after that 3 years through sponsorship if you're willing to pay up to 60K, 62K.
Thanks, Bridget. And great question, Wanda. Bridget, would you also like to take this one from Sarah?
Yeah. So does this mean that the graduate program should be listed only as specific roles or across both specific and generalist? Sarah, if you could just do it as specific roles and split them out, the great thing about working with Prosper is that you can have as many job opportunities as you want. You split it out by role, you would have all the regions within the role. So for argument's sake, if you were doing a civil engineering graduates, you could say that you're looking for them across Auckland, Wellington, Napier. And I would encourage you to split everything out specifically and not to go with any generalist roles. As you can see from the slides that we showed you, the specific roles far outperform the generalist roles. And it's only to yours and the students' benefit to split those out.
Thanks, Bridge. There was another question. Actually, there's kind of 2 questions around diversity and inclusion. Jose asked, does Prosper review and monitor job applications being advertised at Prosper, like on the Prosper job board? So in terms of inclusive language, diversity, etc. And there was a sort of a similar question from someone in the audience asking, what does Prosper do to promote and encourage diversity and inclusion, particularly for people with a disability, to be included and considered for graduate jobs? So they're both really good questions. As I said, they fit a similar theme. So I'm going to, just in the interest of time, I'll bundle it into one. We do a lot. Jose, we don't specifically monitor the language used in each job ad because that's up to the employer to publish that content. However, we do advise. So we do provide a lot of consulting advice and support to ensure, we'll educate our employer partners and try and advise them to say that when you publish it in this content, make it inclusive to both female and male, make it inclusive to different people from different backgrounds. So there's a lot of things that we do in the advising space. We don't actually we don't edit the job ads and that content. One of the things that we do is, I might actually share my screen here. This was just one example I popped up straight away. Is Stats NZ. On all of our employer profiles, employers have got access to create different stories and different pieces of content to encourage people from all walks of life and all different backgrounds to apply for their jobs. So Stats, for example, they've got a neat little section here on LGBT community and what they're doing in this space to be an inclusive organisation for LGBT talent, saying that they're part of the workplace. They've got a workplace rainbow strategy. They've got Inside Out, which is a training program for all staff and so on. So there's a lot more than employers can do outside just LGBT and Māori Pacifica. For example, students with a disability, employers can include content around that, or gender is another one. It's just for whatever reason, Stats haven't got around to creating additional content outside of these two. But it's just a couple of things that we do to really encourage employers to educate, as I said, students from all different backgrounds and all walks of life to encourage them to apply for their jobs. Don't worry, Sarah. Thank you. Was there any other questions, Bridget, that we've missed?
I don't believe so.
Maddie West asks, hi Maddie, by the way, asks regarding advertising of roles, so generalist versus specific role, where do we draw the line in terms of too many roles? So Maddie fears that having every role broken up may actually be create too much of a list and be a little bit too overwhelming for students when they're looking through those opportunities. Any ideas on that, Bridget?
So Maddie, if I put on my student cap and come onto the jobs board, I'm going to be wanting to look for a role that is pertinent to me and my studies. And so I didn't think it was too overwhelming. I actually think it benefits the student because they can really delve straight in there and say, okay, this is company A, and this is the positions that they have open, and these are the opportunities for you as a student. From a student point of view, if I'm coming on and I'm an IT student and I'm searching for IT opportunities, I'm not going to be seeing the overwhelming listings that you are doing where you're looking for an engineering student and you're looking for a business student and you're looking for a health student. I'm just searching with an IT and I'm going to see that you have IT opportunities. Grant, is there anything that you want to add on to that?
Yeah, Maddie, one of the projects that our engineering and product teams are working on at the moment actually is that we're soon, probably in the next few months, we're going to be rolling out a feature where students will be able to search by the role that they're interested in. So let's say, for example, we'll pick on engineering because I know that you hire a lot of engineering grads. Let's say, for example, if a civil engineering student jumps on the platform and they say, I'm looking for a graduate job, I'm studying engineering, and I want to be a civil engineer, they can actually do that moving forward. As I said, this will be a feature that comes in the next few months, but what that will enable students to do is find the job that's the right fit for them based on what they're searching for. So rather than just at the moment, what they can do is they can just search for a job, so a graduate job or internship based on their field of study. We're going to add that additional layer and opportunity for students to search, saying, I want to look for a specific role like civil engineering, graduate position, or they could also just search for a more general role, or they don't need to search for a role at all if they haven't made their mind up and they don't know what they want to do. But that's something that's going to be coming. Why that's relevant to your question is it's going to be a lot easier for students to come across the specific job if that's relevant to them at Arup or any other company, rather than see a whole list of 50 or so opportunities. Some of them might not be relevant to them. I know, like water treatment, for example. If they're not interested in water treatment, they're specifically interested in becoming a civil engineer, that's going to be obviously a lot more relevant to them. And therefore, there's more engagement. As I said, there's something that's going to be coming in the next 2 or 3 months. I think the product team might be reaching out to a few of our employee partners to do some user testing on that as well very soon. So hopefully that answers your question, eases that your concern there, because it'll be a lot easier for students to search through the job board and find the most relevant role. There's a question back here from Matt it was a little bit early on when we were talking, Bridget, around the drop-off of Wellington students, if you recall, and the total number of students searching for jobs in Wellington. I think it was like 26% in 2022 to 20% this year. Do you have any insight as to why that is? I know you work with a lot of government clients in Wellington. Have they shared anything?
Don't, Grant.
Yeah, nor do I, Matt. We'd love to hear from the audience actually, because some of this data, like we've pulled together a lot of this data and we speak with our clients a lot about what's going on in this space. That one, I'm not too sure about either. We can see that there's been a drop-off and there could be a multitude of reasons as to why, but it'll be unfair of me just to make something up. But into the year, if anyone's got any ideas as to why there's been a drop-off for students searching for jobs in Wellington. There was a question from Lance. You'll send the slides next week. Yep, 100%. We'll send the slides. We've also got a number of other slides that we didn't get through today, just in the interest of time. It looks like we're actually nearly out of time now, but we will be sharing the slides, and in the appendix as well, have a list of all the other slides and more information on different degrees and that as well. So look out for that probably mid next week. Cool. No worries. Thanks, Lance, for the kind words. Anything else to cover, Bridget, or should we wrap things up there?
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yeah, lovely thanks so much for all your questions and engagement. We really enjoy running these presentations and sharing the latest data and insights to our Kiwi employers. Do keep a lookout for your inboxes for all those slides, and there'll be the slides, the recording, and just a blog providing a bit of a snapshot of today's session. So we'll share that with you. One of my tips of advice would be that, especially if you've got upper management breathing down your back, of like, why is it so tricky to hire female IT grads? I know a couple of my employer partners last year grabbed those slides from the slide deck, clipped it out into an email, put it into a presentation, and said, look, it's just tough. There's just not that many students graduating from these degrees. and from these specific backgrounds. Feel free to put up our site and present them internally as well to inform upper management and your managers and whatnot, what's going on in the market. So yeah, let's wrap things up there. Great to see you all. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks, Bridget. Great co-host as usual.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye for now.